Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tori, for the introduction, and thank you for having us. My name is Jason, and I am a drawback and marketing consultant for Citta Brokerage. Welcome to our Duty Drawback webinar. Of course, Duty Drawback, very quickly explained, is about a refund on duties that are imported, on goods that are imported into the US and subsequently exported. So Jade will, of course, go through that in detail later on. But let me give you a background about Citta Brokerage. We are a licensed customs house broker. We've been in the drawback business for over 40 years. We take pride in saying that if not one of the very few, we are probably also the only one exclusively focusing on duty drawback entirely. By saying exclusively focusing on drawback, we don't have other services like clearances or transportation, logistics, and other kinds of services. It's just purely drawback. So the good thing about our company is that we've been helping companies nationwide and worldwide actually recover hundreds of thousands or even millions of duties on import duties. Jade has really fabulous examples later on as well that you could share. We service small family business companies, family-run businesses, to big Fortune 500 companies as well. And we are also very proud that we are part of the NCBFAA, the FCBF, which is the Florida Customs Brokers Association. We are also part of the BDO Alliance, which is the biggest CPA firm organization in the US. And we are also part of the different kinds of World Trade Center organizations like World Trade Center Denver, Kentucky, Utah, and other World Trade Center organizations. So I think to quickly say why we are doing this is because we would hope to be a value-added service either for your company or for clients that you have in your network, as something that you can offer, that this is another opportunity for them to recover revenue that they didn't even know they had. And that is something that we always encounter when we speak to clients, is that they're surprised that there's actually so much more money that they can recover. And Jade will show you how that's going to happen. So anyway, I have said Jade's name 3 times today. And so our speaker for today, of course, is Jade Goodell. She is a licensed customs broker and has been with CETA for 11 years now. She is one of our most amazing drawback specialists here. She knows drawback back and forth, like she says it every day, like a prayer, I guess. So as a licensed customs broker, Jade leads client evaluation, process reviews, documentation audits, and claim processing of imports and exports for duty drawback. She has an impeccable record of keeping clients in complete compliance with customs. She has also enjoyed stellar success in ensuring that all applications are approved, as well as running programs for our top clients, our Fortune 500 clients. So without further ado, I would like to present to you Jade Goodell.
That was quite the intro. We could do that every day, right? All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen and start with just a quick presentation for you guys to kind of follow. Okay. Hope everybody's having a good lunch and everybody's kind of ready to dive into this. What I want to encourage all of you guys to do at any point is add any questions that you guys might have in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand or even unmute, I guess, at any point. I always get weird errors on my Zoom. Sorry, guys. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is what is duty drawback? We're going to find out what is duty drawback, who qualifies for drawback, what are the various types of drawback that are available, what is the documentation that's required and necessary to comply with CBP requirements, and just different suggestions that we here at CETA would have for you to have a successful and solid drawback program. Now, one of the key points that I'll hit kind of before we get started on this is the 301 tariffs. I'm sure all of you guys are aware of those 301 tariffs, the China tariffs that have been enacted since 2018. Now, as I'm about to go into this slide, what this is from is before those 301 tariffs were in place, Customs actually had come back and said that there was about $2 billion worth of duty drawback that was available in refunds that wasn't actually being claimed. But that was before the 301 tariffs. As I'm sure most of you guys know, the 301 phases began in about July 2018. There was an extra 25% tariff. There was a lot of different lists, but Essentially, there's about $50 billion worth of goods coming in from China within a 1-year period that were hit with these 25% tariffs, which actually adds about $12.5 billion to the customs revenue. So that's a really big thing. That's money that customs is just sitting on and holding on to that is available for people to be able to get back. So that's just a really important note that I like to be able to hit on for you guys. And I kind of skip around in my stuff here, but now what is drawback anyway? Jason kind of touched on this just a little bit for you guys, that duty drawback is a program that has been around for well over 200 years, almost as long as we've actually been a country. Our founding fathers said that they wanted to have any US-based company that is buying goods from outside of the US, that if they can find an international market, then they established a program so that they can actually get those refunds to be competitive on the US market. So simply put, duty drawback is imported duty paid goods that are subsequently exported or destroyed, which we'll touch on some more shortly with that as well, either in the same condition or further manufactured. Going backwards here, I just skipped that. Again, I apologize. I always have a hard time with these slideshows and keeping up in the right tone of it. Customs had actually published a report that said that the $3 billion actually is what it was, which now we can add an extra probably $15 billion on there, that about a third of that was what was left unclaimed. And that was just an important note that I wanted to kind of hit on for you guys. Now, the real question that most people are going to be asking is who qualifies for drawback? Now, there are 3 entities that actually qualify for drawback. I'm going to walk through each one of those through each of these slides. Now, in this first one here, if I am the exporter of record, and I am also the importer of record, you have the first position to be able to claim drawback. That's probably the most ideal scenario that we look for, is same importer, same exporter. That's going to be simple. We have the same people to talk to. We don't have to get additional things signed. And the list that I have here for you guys is the list of the required documents. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that we need the commercial import invoice, the import packing list, and the entry summary form 7501. That's on the import side. And on the export side, we have the commercial export invoice, export packing list, and the proof of exportation.
Can you repeat the amount that you said at the beginning? I just missed it. On the how much the 301 tariffs generated, and what portion of that could be
absolutely
a drawback. I just sort of missed the numbers.
Yeah, that's totally fine. With what we calculated is that there's about $50 billion of goods that are coming in from China every single year. With 25%, so we're assuming that all of them are 25%, that's about $12.5 billion being added to the customs revenue. Now, before the 301s, Customs had published a report that said there were $3 billion of refundable duties that were available, and that a third of those were being remained unclaimed. Now, that was pre-301, so even if we added the $15 billion or $12 billion on top of that, we're looking at about $15 billion is available in drawback, and about a third of that is never being claimed.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Sorry that we are struggling on this.
Yep, sorry. Here we go. I'm opening it right now.
We do have
Mitch,
a question in the chat. Yeah,
Yep,
okay.
I do see that. Mitch, I'll touch on that a little bit more. FTZ is like a swear word for me, so those seem to be the most complicated processes, but they do work for a lot. So I'll touch on that a little bit more and probably table that for kind of a Q&A section, Mitch. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to kind of start over. 3 entities that qualify for drawback. We're going to walk through what each of those are within the slides. Now, what this one is if you are the exporter of record and you are also the importer of record. Now, the exporter has the first right of refusal for drawback. So they're in that primary position to be able to claim drawback. The required documents in this sense to be able to file successful drawback claims would be the commercial import invoice, the import packing list, the entry summary form 7501. That's on the import side. On the export side, we need the commercial export invoice, the export packing list, and the proof of export, which I'll touch more on that shortly as well. Now, a quick note for you guys, the packing list isn't always required by customs. The only time we typically need to be able to have that is if the invoice doesn't have sufficient information. That would be a situation like clothing. So for example, you have styles that require a size breakdown, size and color breakdown, or maybe the invoice is only showing a summary of the items and the packing list actually breaks it down in its entirety. That would be when we need it. But if your invoice has all of the information necessary, then that can at least reduce 1 extra page or sometimes many extra pages. Now, if I'm the manufacturer in this situation, and this is a manufacturing program, there are some manufacturing documents that are required as well, such as a bill of materials. We'll touch on that a little bit more. But again, I make it sound rather simple, and of course, it's a bit more complicated than that, but these are the documents necessary for filing the drawback claims. And as long as you have good documents, customs will pay your claim out. Now, as we go on to the next slide, let's say that I am the exporter of record, but I'm not the importer of record. Now, the exporter of record is going to need to obtain the import documents, which would be the commercial invoice, maybe the packing slip, and then as well as that entry summary form 7501. But now they have to go to their supplier to say, hey, we're putting together a drawback program and we need the import documents for what we purchased. Now ask yourself, if you are the supplier, or if you guys are working with the supplier, are they really going to want to provide that information to their customer related to what they paid for the goods, as well as where they purchased those goods from? I mean, typically the answer is going to be no for two reasons. One, that import invoice that they'd be providing is going to show the original cost of the goods. Stop and think about that as the importer of record. If you now provide those documents, you lose your opportunity for negotiations, because when the price negotiations do arise with your customer, they now have the ability to see what those prices are and negotiate those lower prices. Now, number two, and probably most important, they're going to see your supplier's invoice, which means they will see where the stock actually came from, and they could circumvent you as that importer of record and go directly to that supplier. So again, that would affect the bottom line of that supplier. Now, the solution that we offer with what we do, we will act as a middleman where we will implement a non-disclosure agreement between those parties so that we can protect that proprietary information, so that that information is going to be provided to us. Now, what's going to happen here is if you are the exporter of record and you are not the importer of record, that is when we would have to get what's called a letter of endorsement. And that letter of endorsement basically assigns the right to the, excuse me, I'm saying it backwards. It used to be called a certificate of delivery, but it's a third-party transfer document. It assigns the right to those entries back to the exporter of record so that they can sign it. So in this situation, this would be one where they would have to cooperate. So to give you guys kind of a real life example that we had, one of the largest customers that we handle, they did about $41 billion in sales just last year. And their entire program was based on this premise. They are never the importer of record. And we've worked with upwards of 50 different suppliers to obtain the necessary documentation for their drawback program. And because of that cooperation that we've garnered, this customer actually gets 7-digit drawback refunds every single year in doing that. Cool story also that I always love to be able to share about this one. During COVID, as you guys know, a lot of companies had to shut down, especially in the retail area. So their standard income was halted for a solid 3 months while they had to close all of their doors. And drawback, the returns from the work that we did here at CBC, was their only source of income for a solid 3-month period. So I always feel like that's a really cool thing, that even if anything stops or sales stops, we still have the last 5 years, again, which I'll touch on a little bit more shortly, to be able to claim retroactively. All right, so now I want to talk about if you are the importer of record and you are not the exporter of record. Now, same thing applies, that you are going to have the commercial export invoice required, the export packing list, the proof of export. And then we actually get a power of attorney back to us as the drawback broker. And we work with the importer of record or the multiple importers and provide a non-disclosure agreement to get the necessary documentation back from the importer, which would be the commercial import invoice, the import packing list, and the entry summary. Now, in addition to that, we need to get what's called, as I was talking about before, the third-party transfer of drawback rights from the importer that's going to convey those rights to drawback back to that exporter. So I'll even share kind of another example that I think I might have even started saying these a little bit backwards, but a really cool example, again, another COVID example that I like to throw out there. There were a lot of face masks, PPE gear, all of that being purchased during COVID. Everybody was trying to make a buck at that time. Well, we had a company we'd worked with that had bought a significant amount of face masks, goggles, and all these sheets and everything. But what ended up happening is that the demand was no longer there for it, and they had imported all of this from China and now had a significant stock in their warehouse that they couldn't sell, and that also that China didn't want to take back. So what do you do in this situation when something like this comes up? What happened was that they were actually in a warehouse, and their contract expired with that warehouse, where they had to actually get rid of everything out of the warehouse and move it somewhere else. They had nowhere to take it. The warehouse had it delivered to the parking lot of their company offices. There was over 100 pallets of this PPE gear that they had to get rid of. Now, this is a situation where we actually worked with them to do a destruction of the goods because now we couldn't export it, we couldn't sell it. They weren't going to get the value that they paid for it, but to get the duty drawback for that, they just had to be able to destroy the goods beyond resale or beyond the use of in the United States. So we actually worked with them. This is a situation where they decided to destroy all of them to get the duty paid reimbursed, but it's kind of unique and cool in this situation because they were actually not the importer of record, but had purchased the goods duty embedded from the importer of record. We actually worked as an intermediary with that importer of record to obtain the import documents, and we were able to get them back over $1 million refunded for drawback on what actually would have been a total loss for that. So just one of my favorite stories to be able to share. Plus, I imagine what that looks like to be sitting there with 100 pallets of stuff in your parking lot to try to do your office work as well. And I'm seeing some questions pop up, and I think as they apply, I want to stop and answer them. Is the entry summary only required for imports over a certain shipment dollar value? Now, that's a really cool question because now this isn't really a drawback question per se, but as far as what qualifies for drawback, we have to have the 7501 entry summary. So I believe you guys would be aware of when an entry summary or a 7501 is required versus otherwise. The 7501 is a required document, and it has to be, we have to have a 7501 to claim the duty back on that. So Lorena, I hope that answers your question, at least as it relates to duty drawback. All right, now the next, you're welcome, Lorena. The next individual that's eligible for drawback is, let's see, I'm skipping my pages, sorry. All right, it's gonna be the intermediate consignee. Again, my apologies, I have these slides a little bit mixed up from normal. Now, this is going to be a unique situation that's kind of different from the first two that I've said. The first two being the exporter of record is eligible for drawback, the importer of record eligible for drawback. Now, this is going to be a unique situation where company A would be the importer of record. They pay the duties. They sell domestically to company B, who is the intermediate consignee. And then company B sells to company C, who now exports the goods. So you can see that trail of events that is kind of happening. Now, this is always a complicated situation that comes up because you now have 3 companies that need to be in compliance with all drawback rules and regulations. And sometimes that can be the biggest challenge that we have to deal with, to be able to get everybody aligned in that scenario. Because if any one of these companies, either A, B, or C, decides that they do not want to participate, then that drawback program is going to be dead in the water, essentially. So we're going to have to get cooperation from the exporter of record by having them sign a letter of endorsement that endorses the rights to drawbacks to the intermediate consignee, who is company B. And they would also be then providing all of their letter of endorsements, all of their export documents, all of their proof of exports have to be provided as well. From there, we then have to go to the importer of record to get entry summaries with the commercial import invoices and packing lists, and as well as that transfer of drawback rights signature to sign off to give the intermediate consignee the rights to use those documents in a drawback program. Now, as long as we have the privilege application and approval, we can submit the drawback claims as the intermediate consignee. But now keep in mind, if your import broker, this is just kind of a side note, if your import broker lists themselves as the importer of record, which does happen sometimes, or if they're listed on, if your freight forwarder is listed on the export document, the bill of lading or airway bill, and they are listed as the exporter of record, while they can't actually claim drawback with their names in those positions, we do still have to get the signatures on the documents that I was referring to, the letter of endorsement, as well as the transfer of drawback rights. Now, they won't be able to claim drawback because ownership and title are the drivers for drawback, but we would still need to have the sign-offs from those companies because possession doesn't matter in cases for drawback. It really comes down to what's listed on those documents. So to kind of confirm, there's only 3 entities, or to kind of wrap up that portion, 3 entities that qualify for drawback: the exporter of record, the importer of record, and an intermediate consignee, as we've gone over. And you can see if you're not both the importer and the exporter of record, and you will have to gain cooperation from all other parties, or else again, that drawback program is dead on the water. Okay, so now that we kind of talked about who is eligible for drawback, I want to go into what the different types of drawback are. Now, what I want to touch on is probably the most common, which is going to be unused merchandise. Now, the most basic definition of this are goods that are unused and untouched from the time that they came into the US until they left the US. Basically, the same condition that they came in, they were exported in that same conditions. Now, there are some operations, as you can see on the screen that I put on here, there are some operations that can be done to the goods before export that allow you to still claim it as unused. You can see we've got testing and cleaning, freezing, repairing, reworking or slitting, even relabeling, disassembling, or unpacking, I think is a really important note as well, as some things will come in, get unpacked and kind of relabeled. That is still considered unused merchandise. So as long as it doesn't equate to manufacturing or production, it is considered unused. Now, the next category to hit on is also a pretty common one that we see happening a lot more lately, actually, is going to be rejected merchandise. Now, this is typically where a 7553 procedure is used. Looks like we have a little typo in there. Sorry, guys. This is typically going to be a one-time drawback filing where you actually have to get CBP approval before exporting or destroying the goods. This is typically going to be in goods that were shipped without consent or that do not conform to specifications or simply put, defective. We recently had a client, I always love to share the cool stories over the 11 years that I've been doing it. I think this was a couple years back, but they'd imported a significant amount of octopus. When they had actually opened the container, though, upon arrival, which is after they paid the duties, after the goods cleared, they opened up the refrigeration unit and found that the refrigeration unit had completely failed. So, favorite thing to do here is just take a pause for a moment and imagine who or how that person felt opening that door, what that smelled like, what that looked like. Had to have been terrible. And so everything had completely rotted at that point. Now, they were actually able to, in working with us, we worked with CBP to destroy the goods as not conforming to spec, because of course they did not conform to specs at that point. And we got approval to be able to destroy the goods. So the octopus was caught, frozen, thawed, and then incinerated once it was all said and done. And we were able to actually get their duties returned. And because it wasn't conforming to specs, they were also able to go back to their supplier and get their money back as well. So on that same note, kind of talking about the destruction and the rules that apply with destruction and how that works. This is becoming more and more common as well. Because as you know, drawback is going to be imported duty paid goods that are subsequently exported or destroyed. Destroying the items, you simply have to ensure that you have a proper certificate of destruction. That certificate of destruction has to be signed by a third party. It has to be a disinterested third party. That's a very important note to make. We recently had somebody approach us that had one of their own warehouses destroy the goods. Customs would view that as an interested third party. So it has to be a completely disinterested third party that destroys the goods. And they simply just have to sign a document that states the goods were destroyed to a state where they could not be resold within the US. There are even instances too where you can recycle and recoup some of the value from that, but keep in mind that whatever value you obtain from recycling or scrap processes does have to be deducted from a drawback return. Now, one of the other types of drawback programs out there is going to be manufacturing drawback program. And this is also something that's becoming more and more common as more manufacturing is happening in the US, which is great. Now, we talk about it separately from unused simply because it really is a unique scenario. Now, by statute, manufacturing is considered to be a process by which merchandise is made into a new and different article, having a distinctive name, character, or use. Or it can even be assembly, which the merchandise is made fit for a particular use. So taking it down to the most basic example that I can consider is if I ordered 2 clamshells and those 2 clamshells were ordered from China, let's say, and those 2 clamshells came into the US. Now, if I sold the clamshells with some screws and bolts, those are still considered unused as long as those are loosely associated. But if I brought those in and I bolted them together and now made myself a musical clamshell instrument, for lack of a better example, it has now been manufactured or further produced. So it's important to note that there is a difference between kitting something, putting everything together into the same box, and manufacturing something or assembling something. Something can still be unused and kitted at the same time, but if it is further manufactured within the US, that is going to be a separate program. And there are just a few more requirements with that. Now, of course, we have to have the bill of materials. The bill of materials will be required to establish what components are used in the manufacturing or assembling of those finished products. For those of you maybe not familiar with that, this would just be something that says this one finished clamshell musical instrument has 2 screws, 2 clamshells, and anything else that might be included with that as well. That would be what the bill of material is. All right. Okay, so one of the most important things to note for you guys is drawback can be a very difficult process. And there are a lot of unique things to almost every program that at least we have put together, at least that I have seen. Now, cool thing is, in my experience here, we have put together many, many different applications with customs, and we have had a 100% success rate in CBP approval on those applications that we've submitted. Now, it's also very important to note that CBP will be the first one to remind you that duty drawback is a privilege and it is not a right. What that means is that at any point, if you are not hitting every bullet point in their requirements to maintain a duty drawback program, that privilege can be revoked or taken away from you. So it is very important to know what is required and to hit each of those bullet points. Now, if you've been importing and exporting over the last 5 years, what we do is we submit an application for a one-time waiver of prior notice. Now, simply put, this means is if you have not given customs the opportunity to inspect your goods prior to every export, then we apply for that privilege of waiving that right that allows us to claim retroactively up to 5 years prior on any past exports and imports. In addition, we include what's called the waiver of prior notice application, which waives that same requirement, but for future exports. So as I talk about those two things, it's important to note what I was mentioning earlier. 7553 is a one-time drawback. You might have customers that come up with this more often than a full program, which is, hey, I've got some goods, I need to get those returned or whatever the case may be, but I don't normally export, but here's $100,000 I'm trying to get back. Instead of putting in all of the time and effort to do a full privilege application, we just do a one-time drawback. That is where we go to the port of export. We say, hey, we're going to be exporting this to claim drawback. Do you want to witness, do you want to inspect it, excuse me, or witness the destruction if that's the case? They can either require it or waive it and have that moved forward so that you can export. In those cases, you can get drawback without going through the full privilege application. It just takes a bit more time for payment and liquidation on those ones. So as I talked about the one-time waiver and the waiver of prior notice that waives the requirement of having to request that from customs, that's what I'm referring to. If we do an application, you can export big, small, medium shipments at any time that you want, and we can claim drawback on those if we have that approval. Now, the most important piece for your bottom line is going to be, or for your customer's bottom line at any point, is going to be the request for quicker payment, which is the application for accelerated payment of drawback. This allows you to be paid prior to the liquidation of the claim with a proper bond in place that we typically will get. So instead of waiting over a year for a drawback claim to liquidate and pay, you can actually have payment issued within 30 to 90 days on those after it's been approved, of course. All right, and other than that as well, we can also file under the principle of substitution in compliance with CBP. And of course, there are various accounting methods for that, like the drawback with low to high, LIFO, etc. on the various other, the accounting method isn't with substitution, but substitution is kind of a cool thing that came into place with the TIFTIA regulations where you can actually claim on the same HTS up to an 8 or 10 digit level, kind of on just a layman's terms. It kind of allows you to be able to claim a shirt against duty paid on pants as long as they share that same HTS. So it's opened up the doors a little bit there. There's just some limitations as far as Canada or Mexico shipment, manufacturing, things like that as well. All right, so what I'll do here is just kind of have you guys take a look at the screen. This is in regards to what is needed for a full privilege application. So in the start of this, I kind of went over with you guys what the requirements were for filing a claim. You know, the basic commercial import invoice, 7501 plus export invoice and proof of export. But when we do a full privilege application, it is a bit more in depth and there's a lot more required from customs. So you can see you've got your basics, 7501, commercial import invoice, packing list, description of inventory, import and export part numbers. Sometimes they ask for catalogs or brochures, anything along those lines. And then the evidence of exportation, the proof of exportation. I'm going to touch more on this because that's probably the biggest issue that we run into in being able to go as far retro as we want, or even to be able to get approval, is with the lack of proof of export. But here's a couple of examples. Bill of lading airway bills, freightway bills. We can get the Canadian B3 showing release into Canada. We can get the pedimentos, and then any delivery records for express shipments as well. And look at that, we jumped right into it. So evidence of exportation. This is, like I say, this is probably the bane of my existence in trying to track down everything that we need. A proof of export is key. We have to be able to prove that the goods originated in the US and ended at a international location. And there's components required within the proof of export as well. So as we touch on this, and as you may look into who might be ready to take on a drawback program, one key question is going to be, what have you been doing in retaining your proof of export documents? We want to be able to go back a full 5 years, but if we can't get all of the proof of exports for the last 5 years, we wouldn't be able to do that. And that's an issue we run into, especially with, say, UPS, FedEx. UPS only saves their records for 120 days. FedEx, we can typically get 24 months. But even then, if those haven't been getting collected, then we're not going to be able to claim that full 5-year period. So acceptable documents are going to be the international bill of lading, an international airway bill, a freightway bill, like I mentioned before, the Canadian B3, Mexican pedimento. And then when I say mail or express delivery records, I'm referring to proof of deliveries from UPS, from FedEx, from other carrier options as well. And I'm going to go ahead now and kind of turn it back to Jason to wrap up at least the presentation part of it. And then again, I'm challenging you guys, come up with some questions for me, give me some examples, and let's have a Q&A session at this point as well. All right, I have a question I'll answer, Lorena. How do I know if our company has a drawback program? Typically, you should know. You would have applied for duty drawback and gotten an approval. But if you can go into your ACE account, if you use the new ACE, there is a drawback section on the front of that page that will actually allow you to see if you have privileges, if they're approved, rejected, or whatever the case may be. I would say if you don't know if your company has a drawback program, let me know, and we can see about getting you on an ACE account or getting your company signed up for that as well.
There's another question.
Yeah, Jason, I'll quickly just answer this question before we go into the wrap-up part. Do you file prior notice to a specific department, or does it have to be at a port of export? Now, if you're referring to the question in regards to a 7553 versus actually sending a privilege application, when it's a one-time drawback program, we first have to submit the request to the port that you're going to be exporting. That's only step one, saying, hey, to this port, they're going to be exporting. They have to sign off on that. And then we do have to file the drawback claims based on the centers of excellence. So that would be something along the lines of machinery is going to be in a specific center of excellence, and that's where the actual claims get filed. But as far as the question in regards to being filed at a specific department, yes, it's always going to be the port of export and then filing at the proper drawback department for the center of excellence. Let's see, I'll keep going for a second, Jason, and let you wrap up. So seconding Mitch's question, I'm going to come back to that one at the very end. We fall under the category of same importer and exporter. We export our items to businesses and also individuals through our website. Can we use the exports to e-commerce to count towards our duty drawback? This one's a very interesting one. We've run into this a lot. It depends on who is the exporter of record or who is paying for shipping and how you're keeping those proof of export. So in the easiest way to answer your question, Beth, yes, you qualify for drawback, but what have you been maintaining for proof of exports or proof of deliveries? That's going to be the key component. Let's see, are the duties recovered dollar for dollar or are they reduced? Good question, and I apologize that I didn't hit on that. You are entitled through drawback to get 99% returned of duty paid as well as your MPF and HMF. All right, Mitch, not a question, but would like to comment on the advantages of hiring an expert in duty drawback. I mean, obviously, as an expert in duty drawback, Mitch, no, I would always say to have an expert in duty drawback if you are looking to move forward in duty drawback, simply because of the regulations. One of the things I hit on is that it's a privilege, not a right, to have duty drawback, and customs will be the first ones to tell you that that's the case. So you want to make sure you're hitting every single bullet point of what's required to make sure that you have success and that it doesn't open you up for additional audits in the future as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, can you hear me okay? I just want to make
yeah,
a
this
quick,
is great.
I don't want to steal your thunder here, but I just want to reinforce everything that you're saying. So in my last few companies I worked for, what we did is we used FTZs and duty drawback as the 1-2 punch to make sure that we're doing everything in our fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the company is right sized as much as possible. And I just can't stress enough what you and Jays are talking about is that we hired someone like you. It was on the East Coast. It was completely different. And that for everyone on the phone call is that there are as you can see, there are so many little nits and bits that you have to worry about. And what we decided to do is hire someone like yourself and make sure that we give you all the information and let you do your job because you're the laser beam. That's what you're, and we could focus on the rest of the business. How do we monitor our business? How do we make sure that we advise supply chain? How do we do all these other things? That's the advantage here. It's not that, oh, I don't have time to do this. It's a business advantage to do duty drawback. And with FTZs and duty drawback, my last company, it totaled to about $1.6 million in savings to the bottom line. And even in a $2.3 billion company, that was visible to the CEO. So I just applaud you guys for being on here today and sharing all this because it is complicated, but if you hire the right people, obviously you guys are experts with the right things, your life will become much easier. And it's a small price to pay for that confidence in your duty drawback because you're right, you're asking permission to not abide by the rules and you have to have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. So thank you.
Mitch, thank you. That's awesome to hear, and I'm glad you've had success with it. And even adding on that, one of the cool things is we have partners that we work with regularly to make sure that if an FTZ is a better option for you, at least on your future shipments, we're going to make sure that if that is the case. In a lot of cases, if there's a lot of domestic sales happening and it's a very small percentage of export, we typically don't recommend an FTZ. FTZs are a whole other ball game, but they are beneficial to some and have been beneficial to some in the past as well. So really appreciate you piping in on that, Mitch, and sharing your story with that as well. So there are benefits to an FTZ, there are benefits to the duty drawback, but I think the biggest thing to remember with that is that those two things are going to go hand in hand. If that is something that you're looking to audit at any point, we can audit that with you and work with our partners to make that determination. But regardless of what determination gets made for the FTZ, there's always still that 5 years retro to be able to go get and to be able to claim at any point.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll answer one last question and then I'm going to pass that on back to Jason. Don says, we're getting ready to work with a sister company overseas in Asia. They will be manufacturing and I anticipate we may have to send some parts back for refurbishment or repair and then having them come back to us. Would you recommend setting up duty drawback in advance or just checking to see what happens for the first year? This is a really, could be a unique situation, but I think it comes up very often. This would be an important time to talk with potentially your import broker, because your import broker, when the goods are coming back for refurbish or repair, then they would come back in under what's called the Chapter 98, which is basically under the returns or repairs, so that you don't have to pay duty a second time as those are coming back in. Now, the way drawback works, though, is that you only get drawback if the goods are imported and exported and stay there. If they come back into the US under the Chapter 98, you've essentially never had to pay duties, but the goods went back into the commerce of the United States. And I'm hoping I explained that properly. But when your question was, would you recommend setting this up or just checking to see what happens for the first year? Please talk to your broker about Chapter 98 and make sure that if they are coming back into the US, that you are not paying duties a second time and that they're coming back in under Chapter 98. If you are paying duties a second time, let us know or let's set up something for drawback as soon as possible so that you can start getting that money back. But I would still recommend you need to talk to your broker and make sure that they're coming back in under Chapter 98.
Yeah. Thanks, Jade. I do have a couple of questions that I want to throw in, and these are usually part of our frequently asked questions. So I'll share it just in case, it might trigger some interest in you. What is the length of time it takes to establish a duty drawback program, and how long does it take to receive funds?
This is always the funnest question to ask because to answer because I wish there was a solid time frame that I could give you. But for those of you that have worked with customs in the past, that it depends on the day, and it depends on the mood, and it depends on the state, and it depends on the representative that you're talking to. But for the most part, what we typically say is that when we get information from somebody and start a program, we're ready to get your privilege application submitted within those first 30 days, as long as we've gotten all the proper information from your team. That will be submitted to customs. From there, I would anticipate and typically promise between 30 and 60 days that we can be prepared to have your first claim filed. Again, as long as that means that we've gotten all of the proper documents for that time frame, then we can get that put together with our project managers. And that's kind of what you would expect. Now, to answer the second part of that, when can we expect approval and payment from customs? That's a different ballgame. Approval sometimes can take. We recently, for the first time in the 11 years that I have been here, got approved for a program that was submitted within 1 week. That is the first time ever in the entire history of time I've been here. Outside of that, we anticipate anywhere from, and it's a huge range, I apologize, anywhere from 90 days to 18 months for approval. Again, it just really depends, but we're starting to see that get better. We're looking at between 9 and 12 months is kind of where it kind of centers back, is 9 to 12 months. Once it's approved, we typically get the payments issued within 30 to 60 days. And the question, just to hit on that, is there a look back period where we can claim prior duties? Yes, it is 5 years from the date of filing. So we can claim on any import or export in the last 5 years from the date we file. Keep in mind, that means if you connected with me today and we had to get your privilege application in, that might take about 30 days. So we'd probably be looking at just really starting January 1, 2019 to current that we'd be able to claim on, just to make sure that we're getting enough time in there for proper information.
Okay, so the next question is related to something that I actually just encountered a few weeks ago, which is a client that had a privileges application and they weren't really very happy with how it was going, and they felt like they weren't getting the maximum refunds they were expecting. And we do discover sometimes that some firms just go really, like high level, just whatever is submitted to them. One thing that we do is really to go deep into your records and make sure that we check every single item. And I remember one time we were talking about a client and they said, oh, we're still going, because we just keep giving, refunds, and we keep filing claims for them, and they're surprised where it's coming from, and they don't know what we sift through every single detail of record. And so the next question is, if I'm not happy with my current drawback provider, how do we go about moving to you, for example, to Citta, for example, and what do we have to do to make it happen?
I'm gonna have to go with this response, but our emails are in the chat. No. This happens a lot. I mean, I think this can happen in any scenario where somebody might not be happy with their current broker. They're not moving fast enough. They're requiring too much of them, whatever the case may be. I always encourage to shop around and hear the different approaches of what each company is going to do. I can share kind of what we do different in retaining all of your records for the appropriate amount of time that's required, which can be up to 9 years, sometimes even more than that. And that we'll go through and really make this a tailored program for your team to be able to be successful and find out what was lacking with your prior broker as well. Mitch, you've asked one more question. Commenting on the time frame to receive your duties back from the government after submission. This is the only time that I can actually give you kind of a more solid and more satisfying time frame. Once it's been approved, we can submit a claim, and I would say within 2 to 4 weeks, the payment will have been issued. Now, the way we handle it here is we get ACH payments directly from customs so that we can then disperse those back to our customers, lest any of our contingency, sorry, the word kind of left me, kind of less our contingency at that point. So within 2 to 4 weeks, if you have an ACH in place too, that's going to be issued a lot faster than a check. The checks are typically issued on Fridays. So yeah, there's typically going to be pretty quick after it's been approved. Now, if I go back on this, sorry, Jason, there is the one-time drawback, the 7553, that does not have accelerated payment associated with that. That is only if we do the full privilege application program with the one-time waiver and waiver prior notice. So if you are doing just the one-time shipments and not going through that full application process, in those cases, you do have to wait till it liquidates. Now, the drawback claims are going to liquidate within 1 year after the last import liquidates. So I would say that's anywhere from 12 to 18 months that a claim will liquidate, and then customs will work on paying that out. So The unfortunate part of those is without accelerated payment, that can take a significant amount of time for a payment to come through.
Okay.
Come
So-
on, Mitch, keep them coming.
More questions before we say goodbye? Anyway, while we wait, if ever there are more, we just want you to know, just in case you're interested to know more, you can reach out to us. Our emails are in the chat, and I'm sure that Tori will also share your emails with us. We can set a meeting with you to talk in detail about the things that you want to know about the Drawback and how to run a program for your company or for your client. And we also have a one-page questionnaire, which we can share with you via email. You can keep that and use it every time that you have a client or a contact that wants to, to explore duty drawback. And then you can also visit our website, www.cittabrokerage.com. If you want to know more information, there are some webinars there as well that you might want to take a look at, and more information about duty drawback. So yeah, so I give you now to Tori again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And looks like we are just in time for the end of the lunch hour. So perfect. Yeah, just contact us if you have any extra questions. And hopefully we'll see you soon at other lunch and learns and other trainings.
Yes, and hopefully to see everybody in person as well next time.
Yeah, also that. One day, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Have a good lunch, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Tori. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you.
Email sent out to you.
Bye.
Thanks.